Welcome back to Night's Embrace, where the warmth of truth burns away the comfortable shadows of beautiful lies, and the most devastating revelations unfold not in darkness, but in the harsh light of divine honesty. The fire flickers beside us tonight with an uneasy rhythm, its flames dancing between golden radiance and the deeper shadows that truth always casts. In our last journey together, we uncovered the greatest deception in cosmic history, how Meta, mother of fingers, that abandoned daughter of the greater will, spent centuries fabricating divine guidance from the broken fragments of cosmic silence. We witnessed the birth of the Golden Order, that perfect system of control, built not upon celestial wisdom, but upon the desperate improvisations of a forgotten herald who could not accept that her parent had moved on to other concerns. But tonight, dear listeners, we must confront an even more heartbreaking truth, for what we discovered about cosmic deception was only the beginning of a far more intimate tragedy. Tonight we follow the story of someone who lived that lie from the inside, who served as the beating heart of a fabricated paradise, who channeled false divinity through her very soul, who gave birth to children within a system she began to suspect was built upon cosmic abandonment. This is the story of Queen Marika, the Eternal, and how the most devoted servant of divine order became its most devastating enemy. We will walk alongside her as the beautiful lie she helped create becomes a weight too terrible for even a goddess to bear. We will feel the moment when maintaining paradise through deception becomes more unbearable than destroying it through truth. For Marika's ultimate betrayal was not against the Golden Order, it was not against the greater will, or the Two Fingers, or even her own children. No, her ultimate betrayal was against the most seductive lie ever told, the lie that peace built upon falsehood is preferable to chaos built upon truth. Her betrayal was choosing honesty over harmony, authenticity over order, devastating reality over comforting fantasy. Tonight we discover what happens when a goddess realizes she has spent centuries serving not divine will, but cosmic abandonment, when the vessel of ultimate authority discovers that her authority was never divine at all. We will witness the moment when the most powerful being in the world faces a choice that would break the heart of any mortal: preserve the beautiful lie that brings peace to millions, or speak the terrible truth that will shatter paradise itself. This is the story of how love itself became the enemy of lies, how maternal devotion made cosmic deception unbearable, how the very perfection of false paradise revealed its own emptiness to those forced to maintain it. This is how a goddess learned that some truths are so devastating that speaking them destroys everything you hold dear, and how she chose to speak them. So settle into the comfortable darkness beside our dying fire, dear listeners, and prepare yourself for the most tragic betrayal in the history of the cosmos. The moment when truth defeated paradise, when honesty conquered peace, when a goddess chose to shatter her own heart rather than live another day within the most beautiful lie ever conceived. Chapter 1. The Weight of False Divinity. In the golden halls of Lendel, where divine light filtered through windows that had never known natural sun, Queen Marika the Eternal stood before the Two Fingers and felt the familiar weight of cosmic lies settling into her transformed bones. Each morning brought the same ritual, the same language of light, dancing in symbols that hung in the air like accusations, the same translation of fabricated wisdom into laws that would govern the lives of millions. She was the perfect vessel, the living conduit between cosmic will and mortal understanding, and every fiber of her divine being had been crafted for this singular purpose. The Elden Ring pulsed within her chest like a second heart, its runes shifting and rearranging themselves according to commands that flowed through her consciousness with the weight of absolute authority. She had become something more than mortal, more than human, more than the frightened shaman girl who had once knelt beside sacred pools and heard what she believed to be the voice of ultimate justice. But transformation, dear listeners, is never without its price, and the price of becoming divine is that you must live with divine awareness, the terrible clarity that comes from serving as the focal point of cosmic power, the crushing responsibility, channeling forces that reshape the fundamental nature of reality itself. Marika had transcended mortality, only to discover that divinity came with burdens no mortal mind could have comprehended. Every law she enacted rippled outward through the Erd tree's roots like golden blood through cosmic arteries, touching every soul that bore grace, shaping every thought that aligned with Golden Order orthodoxy. She could feel the weight of their faith, the trust of countless millions who believed her commands came from the highest authority in creation. Their prayers rose to her like incense, carrying the hopes and fears of those who had surrendered their spiritual autonomy to serve what they believed was divine perfection. And yet, there were moments when the commands that flowed through the two fingers felt strange, disconnected, as if they served no greater purpose than the maintenance of the system itself. Instructions that spoke of cosmic justice, but resulted in cosmic control. Wisdom that claimed to come from ultimate authority, but bore the peculiar flavor of improvisation, of someone creating divine law from the fragments of half-remembered guidance, rather than channeling the living will of an active God. The two fingers themselves had begun to change in ways that troubled her divine consciousness. Once, they had spoken with eloquent certainty, their language of light flowing with the rhythm of absolute truth. But increasingly, there were pauses, hesitations, moments when the symbols hung incomplete in the air, as if their source had forgotten what divine wisdom was supposed to say. The finger readers who translated these communications grew more creative in their interpretations, filling gaps with theological speculation rather than receiving clear divine instruction. Marika found herself studying these moments of silence with growing unease. In her transformation, she had gained capabilities beyond mortal understanding, the ability to perceive the flow of cosmic forces, to sense the connections that bound the greater will to its vassals, to feel the pulse of divine communication across the vast distances of space. And what she sensed in those moments of two-finger silence was not divine contemplation, but emptiness, a void where cosmic authority should have been speaking. The perfect system she had helped establish began to feel like an elaborate performance for an audience that had long since departed the theater. The Golden Order continued to function with mechanical precision, its laws flowing through her divine consciousness and out into the world with unwavering consistency, but consistency born of repetition rather than revelation, patterns maintained through memory rather than receiving fresh divine guidance. She began to notice how the other powers that served the Golden Order seemed to share her growing unease. Malekith, bound to her divine will and carrying the rune of death within his blade, sometimes hesitated before following her commands, as if some part of his consciousness recognized that the orders he received lacked the absolute authority they claimed to possess. The shadows around him seemed deeper lately, as if even destined death itself was beginning to question the foundations of the system it was bound to serve. Most troubling of all were the moments when Marika found herself alone in the depths of the Erd Tree, surrounded by the living machinery of cosmic law, and felt forgotten, not by her subjects, who worshipped her with unwavering devotion, but by something far more fundamental, the sensation that she was channeling the echoes of departed authority rather than serving as the vessel of living divine will, that she had become the administrator of a cosmic system whose architect had moved on to other projects without bothering to inform the staff. The weight of false divinity, she was beginning to understand, was not the burden of serving ultimate authority. It was the crushing responsibility of maintaining ultimate authority. When you suspected that authority had become an elaborate fiction, it was the exhaustion of being perfect when perfection had become performative rather than authentic. It was the loneliness of being the most powerful being in the world while suspecting that your power was built upon the broken dreams of cosmic abandonment. And still, every morning, she stood before the two fingers and channeled their fabricated wisdom into divine law, because the alternative, admitting that the golden order might be built upon lies, was too terrible to contemplate. The peace of the world, the faith of her followers, the meaning of existence itself, all of it depended upon her continued performance of divine authority that she was beginning to suspect was anything but divine. But lies, no matter how beautiful, no matter how necessary, no matter how desperately needed, lies have weight, and that weight grows heavier with each passing day, each fabricated command, each moment of cosmic silence where divine guidance should have been speaking. The weight of false divinity was becoming unbearable, and even a goddess has limits to what her soul can carry without breaking. Chapter 2. The Birth of Radagon. The human mind, dear listeners, is a remarkably adaptive thing, capable of protecting itself from truths too devastating to bear through mechanisms so subtle that even the conscious self remains unaware of their operation. But divine consciousness, that transcendent awareness that comes with serving as a vessel for cosmic forces, faces challenges that mortal psychology was never designed to handle. When a goddess begins to suspect that her entire divine purpose is built upon cosmic lies, the mind must find ways to preserve sanity, even if it means dividing itself in two. The birth of Radagon did not happen in a single moment of dramatic transformation, but rather through a gradual process that Marika herself barely recognized as it unfolded. It began with small inconsistencies in her own thoughts, moments when part of her consciousness would resist the doubts that were beginning to plague her divine awareness, when her questioning mind would suggest that the two fingers might be fabricating their guidance. Another part of her being would rise up with fierce loyalty to defend the Golden Order's sanctity. At first, these internal conflicts felt like the natural struggle between faith and doubt that even mortals experience when their beliefs are challenged. But as the weight of cosmic deception grew heavier upon her divine shoulders, these opposing voices within her consciousness became more distinct, more separate, until they began to feel less like conflicting thoughts and more like conflicting selves. A voice that defended the Golden Order spoke with such passionate conviction that it seemed to possess its own independent existence. It pointed to the peace that divine law had brought to the lands between, the order that had replaced the chaos of competing magical traditions, the millions of souls who lived in harmony under the guidance of cosmic authority. This voice reminded her of her sacred duty, her divine purpose, her obligation to serve the greater will, regardless of personal doubts or fears. And this voice, this defender of divine orthodoxy, began to take on characteristics that were distinctly different from Marika's own. Where she was beginning to question, it remained faithful. Where she was growing weary of the performance of divinity, it found renewed strength in service. Where she was haunted by moments of cosmic silence, it heard the clear voice of ultimate authority calling them to ever greater devotion. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, this internal voice began to manifest as something more than mere thought. It developed its own mannerisms, its own way of interpreting divine commands, its own approach to wielding the power of the Elden Ring. When Marika channeled cosmic law through her divine being, she could feel this other consciousness taking a more active role, not as a passive aspect of her personality, but as a distinct entity sharing her transformed flesh. The red hair was the first physical sign of this internal division. Marika had always been golden in her divine radiance, her locks flowing like liquid sunlight, as befitted the vessel of the Erdtree's power. But increasingly, when she found herself defending the Golden Order against her own doubts, when she channeled the most orthodox interpretations of divine law, her hair would shift to a deep, burnished red, the color of absolute conviction, of unquestioning faith, of loyalty so pure it bordered on fanaticism. She named this other self Radagon, though she could not say precisely why that name felt appropriate. Perhaps it was because this aspect of her being seemed to radiate the fierce light of uncompromising devotion, or perhaps because it represented the rigid adherence to cosmic order that her questioning mind was beginning to find so difficult to maintain. Radagon was everything that Marika was supposed to be, as the vessel of divine authority, faithful, unwavering, absolutely convinced of the righteousness of the Golden Order's cause. But Radagon was more than just a psychological defense mechanism. As this internal division deepened, Marika began to realize that she could consciously shift between these two aspects of her being, allowing Radagon to take control when the demands of divine performance became too overwhelming, when the weight of maintaining cosmic lies threatened to crush her increasingly fragile faith. In those moments, she could retreat into the deeper chambers of her consciousness, while Radagon handled the terrible burden of channeling fabricated divine wisdom with genuine conviction. The relief was intoxicating. When Radagon assumed control, the doubts that plagued Marika's divine awareness would fade into background whispers, replaced by the warm certainty of absolute faith. The two fingers' hesitations became moments of divine contemplation rather than signs of systemic breakdown. The inconsistencies in cosmic law became subtle tests of theological understanding rather than evidence of improvisation. The crushing weight of false divinity lifted, replaced by the lighter burden of serving what felt like authentic divine authority. Through Radagon's consciousness, the Golden Order regained its beauty, its purpose, its sacred meaning. The system that had begun to feel like an elaborate performance became once again a divine mandate worthy of total devotion. The peace that divine law had brought to the world justified any personal sacrifices that might be required. The greater will's wisdom, channeled through the two fingers and flowing into the world through their shared divine being, represented the highest good that consciousness could serve. But this psychological salvation came at a cost that Marika was only beginning to understand. Each time she allowed Radagon to assume control, it became easier to retreat from the growing evidence of cosmic deception. Each moment of faithful certainty made it harder to return to the questioning awareness that had begun to perceive the truth behind the beautiful lies. She was not healing the fundamental contradiction at the heart of her divine existence. She was simply dividing herself so that part of her could continue to serve lies, while another part remained safely ignorant of their nature. The most troubling aspect of this internal division was how natural it began to feel. Radagon was not some foreign presence invading her consciousness. He was her, as much a part of her divine being as her own memories and desires. Yet he was also separate enough that they could disagree, could conflict, could even work at cross purposes while sharing the same transformed flesh. When Marika's doubts grew too strong, Radagon would rise up to suppress them. When Radagon's faith became too rigid, Marika would reassert herself to maintain the flexibility necessary for divine rule. They became partners in the maintenance of cosmic deception, one questioning, but unable to act on those questions, the other faithful, but unable to acknowledge the evidence that contradicted that faith. Together, they could continue to serve as the vessel of divine authority, while the truth of cosmic abandonment grew ever more obvious to those willing to see it. But division, even divine division, is not resolution. It is merely postponement, a way of avoiding the inevitable moment when the contradictions become too great for even a split consciousness to contain. And as the Golden Order continued its perfect performance of divine guidance, while the cosmic silence grew deeper, both Marika and Radagon would eventually be forced to confront the truth that lay at the heart of their shared existence. They were not serving divine will, but cosmic abandonment, dressed in the borrowed robes of ultimate authority. Chapter 3. The Cracks in Paradise. Even the most perfect systems, dear listeners, carry within them the seeds of their own revelation, and the Golden Order, in its magnificent attempt to create flawless divine governance, had achieved such crystalline perfection that its very beauty began to expose the artificial nature of its construction. Like a song played too precisely, a performance executed too flawlessly, the system's inhuman consistency started to feel wrong. Marika, even in her divided state, could not ignore the signs that were multiplying throughout the lands between. Like hairline fractures spreading through golden glass, the two fingers, once masters of eloquent oration, whose wisdom had drawn champions from across the world to serve at the round table hold, were falling into longer and longer periods of contemplative silence. Their communications, when they came, carried an increasingly mechanical quality, as if the language of light was being assembled from a finite library of divine phrases, rather than flowing from an infinite wellspring of cosmic wisdom. The finger readers, those devoted interpreters who had once translated divine symbols with absolute confidence, began to show signs of strain that troubled Marika's increasingly perceptive consciousness. She watched them during the sacred ceremonies, saw how they would pause before particularly complex passages of light language, their faces creased with concentration as they struggled to derive meaning from symbols that seemed to repeat familiar patterns rather than convey fresh divine insight. Some had begun to add their own theological flourishes to fill gaps in the communication, weaving elaborate interpretations around simple divine commands to maintain the illusion of cosmic complexity. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the behavior of the shadow-bound beasts, those loyal guardians assigned to each Empyrean as both protector and failsafe. Maliketh, bound to her own divine will and carrying within his flesh the rune of death itself, had begun to exhibit moments of hesitation that chilled her transformed heart. When she channeled particularly complex divine commands through their shared bond, she could feel his consciousness recoiling slightly, not in rebellion, but in confusion, as if some primal part of his being recognized that the orders he received lacked the absolute authority they claimed to possess. The precision of the Golden Order's function had become so perfect that it highlighted its own artificiality. Every law flowed through the established channels with mechanical consistency. Every divine decree followed predictable patterns of cosmic logic. Every sacred ritual unfolded according to predetermined forms that never varied, never surprised, never revealed the spontaneous creativity that should characterize communication with a living cosmic consciousness. Marika found herself studying the ancient records of the Golden Order's early days, searching for some explanation for the growing sense that something fundamental had changed in the nature of divine guidance. The earliest theological texts spoke of the two fingers as vibrant communicators whose wisdom sparked fierce debates among scholars attempting to understand the full implications of cosmic law, but recent interpretations had become increasingly standardized, as if the divine wisdom itself had ossified into rigid orthodoxy rather than continuing to evolve with the changing needs of the world. The very success of the Golden Order's control mechanisms began to work against the illusion of divine authenticity. The system operated so smoothly, governed the lands between so efficiently, maintained peace and prosperity with such unwavering consistency, that it felt more like a cosmic machine than the living expression of divine will. Natural systems, Marika knew from her memories of the pre-Golden Order world, contained elements of chaos, surprise, organic development that reflected the unpredictable creativity of genuine life. But the Golden Order had eliminated all such variables in favor of perfect, predictable, soul-crushingly consistent, divine performance. Even the miracles that flowed through the Erdtree's root network felt increasingly programmed. The grace that touched the faithful followed patterns so regular that Marika could predict its distribution, like a master craftsman, understanding the behavior of familiar tools. The healing that emanated from sites of divine blessing operated according to principles so mechanically consistent that it seemed more like advanced technology than divine intervention. The very perfection of these cosmic gifts revealed their artificial nature to anyone perceptive enough to notice the absence of the beautiful unpredictability that characterizes authentic divine creativity. Most troubling of all was the increasing frequency with which the Golden Order's perfect responses proved inadequate to address situations that fell outside predetermined parameters. When faced with genuinely novel challenges, the system would either force them into existing categories or simply ignore them until they became crises that required dramatic intervention. The divine wisdom that should have provided guidance for unprecedented situations instead offered only variations on familiar themes, as if the cosmic intelligence behind the Golden Order was working from a limited script rather than drawing upon infinite understanding. Radagon, that faithful defender of divine orthodoxy within her consciousness, worked overtime to provide alternative explanations for these troubling observations. Perhaps the greater will was testing their faith through apparent inconsistencies. Perhaps divine wisdom appeared mechanical because mortal understanding was too limited to perceive its true complexity. Perhaps the periods of two-finger silence represented moments of cosmic contemplation too profound for immediate interpretation. But Marika's questioning awareness could no longer accept these comfortable rationalizations. The patterns were too consistent, the mechanical precision too obvious, the absence of genuine divine spontaneity too glaring to ignore. The most beautiful paradise ever conceived was revealing itself as an elaborate clockwork mechanism, perfectly designed but fundamentally lifeless, operating according to programs established long ago rather than responding to the living guidance of an active cosmic consciousness. The cracks in paradise were spreading, becoming impossible to conceal from those with eyes willing to see. And as they spread, they revealed not the presence of cosmic evil or divine malice, but something far more disturbing: the absence of any cosmic presence at all. The Golden Order was running on autopilot, maintaining the forms of divine governance, while the divine authority that had supposedly established those forms had long since turned its attention elsewhere. The terrible beauty of perfect lies was beginning to expose itself as terrible precisely because it was so perfect, so complete in its artificial construction, that it could no longer hide the fundamental emptiness at its core. Paradise was cracking, and through those cracks, the void of cosmic abandonment was beginning to show. Chapter 4: The Children of Lies. But it was not the systemic failures of divine governance that finally broke something fundamental within Marika's divided consciousness. It was love, the fierce, protective devotion that burns in the heart of every mother when she looks upon her children and realizes they have been born into a world that will demand sacrifices of them they should never have to make. Standing in the shadow chambers beneath Landel, where her twin sons Morgoth and Mohg had been hidden away like shameful secrets, Marika felt the full weight of what the Golden Order's beautiful lies had cost those she loved most dearly. Here in the darkness that divine light never touched lived the evidence of everything wrong with the system she had helped create. Her own children, born bearing the ancient aspects of the crucible that had once been revered as divine blessings, now imprisoned because their very existence contradicted the refined orthodoxy that cosmic authority supposedly demanded. Morgoth and Mohg had been born with horns, those magnificent manifestations of primordial power that in earlier ages had marked their bearers as touched by sacred forces, blessed with connection to the wild unity from which all life had emerged. But the Golden Order's fabricated wisdom, channeled through Meta's broken interpretations of cosmic will, had declared such aspects to be impurities, deviations from divine perfection that must be hidden, contained, refined away for the greater good of cosmic harmony. And so her children lived in exile beneath their own birthright, their royal blood meaningless in the face of physical forms that challenged the artificial categories into which the Golden Order had divided the natural world. They served as living reminders that the cosmic authority their mother channeled was not cosmic at all, but the desperate improvisations of an abandoned herald trying to maintain relevance by creating divine law from the fragments of half-remembered guidance. Marika would visit them in secret, her heart breaking a little more with each encounter. Morgoth, loyal despite his imprisonment, had internalized the Golden Order's judgment of his own nature so completely that he spoke of his horned aspect as a curse to be borne with dignity rather than a blessing to be celebrated. He defended the very system that had declared him an abomination, his devotion to divine law so pure that he accepted his own condemnation as evidence of cosmic justice rather than cosmic error. Mohg had taken a different path, his exile from grace driving him toward darker pursuits and forbidden knowledge. But even in his rebellion, he remained trapped within the framework of the Golden Order's artificial categories, seeking power outside divine law rather than questioning the legitimacy of that law itself. Both of her sons had been shaped by lies so beautiful and complete that they could not imagine alternatives to the system that had rejected them. The cruelty was exquisite in its perfect systematization. The Golden Order had not simply declared certain forms of existence unacceptable, it had created theological frameworks so compelling that even its victims internalized their own condemnation. The omens who bore crucible aspects learned to see themselves as cursed rather than blessed, their natural forms twisted into symbols of cosmic imperfection. rather than cosmic diversity. The very people who should have been living proof of the Golden Order's falseness became instead its most tragic defenders, their suffering transformed into evidence of divine justice rather than divine abandonment. But it was not only her obviously afflicted children who suffered under the weight of cosmic lies. Godwin the Golden, perfect in his adherence to divine law, shone with such radiant orthodoxy that he had become more symbol than person, a living embodiment of Golden Order ideals so complete that his individual humanity had been subsumed into his role as divine exemplar. In trying to raise a son worthy of cosmic authority, Marika had watched him become a beautiful automaton, performing divine perfection with such flawless precision that she sometimes wondered if anything genuinely alive remained beneath the golden radiance. Her stepchildren, born from Radagon's union with Renala, carried their own burden of serving a system built upon fabricated authority. Rani, chosen as an Empyrean candidate by Two Fingers, who spoke with the voice of cosmic abandonment rather than cosmic will, faced a future of divine servitude to powers that were anything but divine. Radan and Rykard, raised to serve as pillars of the Golden Order, would spend their lives defending cosmic law that had no cosmic source, their considerable talents devoted to maintaining lies too beautiful to abandon and too false to sustain. And then there were Malenia and Michaela, the twins born from the union of her divided self, carrying within their flesh the consequences of psychological fracture made physical. Malenia's rotting sickness and Michaela's eternal childhood were not random curses, but the inevitable result of bringing new life into existence while serving fabricated divine authority. They were born into contradiction itself, simultaneously blessed with Empyrean potential and cursed with afflictions that marked them as evidence of the system's fundamental brokenness. Standing before her assembled children, watching them navigate the impossible demands of a system that claimed cosmic authority while operating on cosmic abandonment, Marika felt something crack inside her divine consciousness that neither Radagon's faithful defense nor her own psychological compartmentalization could repair. These were not abstract theological failures or systematic inefficiencies. These were the faces of those she loved most, shaped by lies she had helped to maintain, suffering under laws she had helped to enforce, trapped within categories that had no divine source. The words she had spoken to them echoed in her transformed memory with new and terrible meaning. Make of thyselves that which ye desire, be it a lord, be it a god, but should ye fail to become aught at all, ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices at the time channeled through the Two Fingers' fabricated guidance. These had seemed like encouragement toward divine greatness, but now, with growing awareness of cosmic deception, they felt like prophecy, a recognition that the system she served would eventually demand the destruction of everything she held dear in service to authority that was anything but authoritative. Her children were not inheriting divine birthright, they were inheriting cosmic lies, dressed in the borrowed robes of ultimate truth. They would spend their lives serving powers that had abandoned them before they were born, fighting wars justified by fabricated theology, making sacrifices to cosmic authority that existed only in the desperate imagination of a broken herald waiting for messages that would never come. The maternal love that had once motivated her service to divine law now made that service unbearable. Every command she channeled through the Two Fingers' broken guidance was a betrayal of those she was supposed to protect. Every law she helped establish was a trap that would ensnare future generations in beautiful lies that would consume their lives in service to nothing more than cosmic abandonment. The children of lies deserved better than to live their entire existence within fabricated paradise. They deserved truth, no matter how terrible; honesty, no matter how destructive; reality, no matter how chaotic. The love that had made her a perfect divine vessel was beginning to make her the perfect divine rebel, and the transformation had only just begun. Chapter 5. The night everything changed. On a night when winter fog rolled through the valleys of the lands between like the breath of sleeping gods, when the stars seemed dimmer than usual, as if the cosmos itself had grown weary of watching the beautiful charade below, the pieces of a plan that had been forming in the depths of Marika's fractured consciousness finally aligned with the precision of clockwork designed by divine hands. The night of black knives was no sudden tragedy born from external malice. It was the culmination of careful preparation, of connections fostered across years of growing awareness, of strategic positioning that would have impressed the most cunning of mortal tacticians. But this was not mortal cunning at work. This was divine intelligence turned against the very system it had been created to serve. Maternal love weaponized against cosmic lies that had become unbearable to maintain. Marika had been watching her stepdaughter Rani for some time, recognizing in the young Empyrean a kindred spirit who questioned the foundations of divine authority in ways that the Two Fingers' guidance could not suppress. Rani's studies into the nature of fate and destiny had led her down dangerous paths of inquiry toward conclusions that aligned perfectly with Marika's own growing suspicions about the fabricated nature of cosmic guidance. When their secret conversations began, they spoke in careful metaphors and oblique references, two souls recognizing each other's rebellion against beautiful lies while maintaining the performance of faithful service. The Black Knife assassins were the perfect instruments for what needed to be done. Human women whose ties to Marika herself ran deeper than blood, whose loyalty transcended the artificial boundaries that the Golden Order had imposed upon the natural world. They had witnessed the gradual transformation of their people's sacred traditions under the weight of cosmic orthodoxy, seen their own magical practices refined into approved forms that served systematic control rather than spiritual truth. When Marika approached them with her proposal, they understood immediately what was being asked of them and why it was necessary. But the true genius of the plan lay not in its execution, but in its emotional camouflage. The death of Godwyn the Golden would serve multiple purposes, each layer of meaning hidden beneath the others, like nested deceptions designed to fool even divine consciousness. On the surface, it would appear as tragedy, the assassination of her beloved son by forces unknown, providing perfect justification for any extreme response that might follow. The maternal grief would be genuine, the shock and pain authentic enough to fool even the most perceptive observers. Deeper than that, Godwyn's death would serve as liberation for one who had become too perfect, a symbol of Golden Order orthodoxy, to remain genuinely alive. His radiant perfection had made him more divine automaton than living being, his individual humanity subsumed so completely into his role as cosmic exemplar that destroying the symbol might paradoxically free whatever remained of the person beneath it. In death, he could finally escape the crushing weight of flawless divine performance that had defined his existence. But the deepest purpose of all was strategic, the introduction of destined death into a system that had tried to eliminate ending itself from the cosmic equation. The Golden Order's attempt to create perfect immortality had resulted in stagnation, in the preservation of forms long after their spiritual essence had departed. by allowing death to touch even divine flesh, the Knight of Black Knives would prove that the system's claims to ultimate authority were as false as everything else about its cosmic pretensions. Ranni's simultaneous death was essential to the plan's success, her sacrifice ensuring that the rune of death would fracture rather than forming a complete circle. The broken pieces would serve different purposes, one half spreading through the tree's roots to contaminate the perfect order with the reality of ending, the other half spirited away by Ranni's disembodied consciousness to serve future plans that extended far beyond the immediate goal of exposing cosmic deception. As the assassins moved through the corridors of Lendel like shadows given purpose, their god-slaying blades gleaming with fragments of destined death, Marika stood in the deepest chambers of the tree and felt the weight of cosmic lies finally becoming too great for even divine consciousness to bear. The performance of channeling fabricated wisdom through the two fingers' broken guidance, the maintenance of systematic control over millions of faithful souls, the preservation of beautiful paradise built upon cosmic abandonment, all of it was about to crumble beneath the pressure of truth finally demanding recognition. She could feel Radagon stirring within their shared consciousness, that faithful defender of Golden Order orthodoxy, beginning to sense what was about to unfold. His horror at her plans had been growing for months, as her intentions became impossible to hide even from her other self. But Radagon's faithful protests could no longer override the maternal love that made continuing the cosmic charade unbearable. Her children deserved truth, no matter how terrible reality, no matter how destructive honesty, no matter how much it would cost them all. When the moment came, when she felt Godwin's soul departing his perfect flesh through the touch of destined death, the genuine grief that flooded through her divine being was overwhelming enough to justify any response that might follow. But beneath that authentic maternal anguish lay something far more dangerous: relief. Relief that the unbearable weight of beautiful lies was finally being lifted from her cosmic shoulders. Relief that the impossible choice between truth and peace was finally being forced upon her in a way that would make hesitation. The two fingers' response to the crisis was everything she had expected: mechanical application of predetermined protocols rather than genuine divine guidance for an unprecedented situation. The language of light formed familiar patterns of comfort and reassurance, offering standard theological explanations for tragedy rather than demonstrating the creative wisdom that should characterize authentic cosmic consciousness. Even in the face of the first divine death in the history of the Golden Order, they could only offer variations on established themes rather than fresh insight appropriate to the magnitude of what had occurred. And in that moment, as she stood surrounded by the perfect systematic responses of a cosmic machine pretending to be divine authority, Marika felt something break inside her transformed consciousness that could never be repaired. The beautiful lie had finally revealed itself so completely that maintaining it became psychologically impossible, not because she lacked the strength to continue the performance, but because the performance had become a betrayal of everything she actually held sacred. The Knight of Black Knives was the night everything changed, not because external forces had altered the fundamental nature of reality, but because the weight of beautiful lies had finally exceeded the capacity of even divine consciousness to bear them. What came next would not be madness or weakness or failure of divine will. It would be the most sane response possible to discovering that paradise itself was built upon cosmic abandonment. The lies had become unbearable, and when lies become unbearable, truth must be spoken, no matter how much it destroys in the process. Chapter 6. The Shattering of Self. In the aftermath of Godwin's death, As the reality of divine mortality settled over the lands between, like ash from a cosmic funeral pyre, Marika stood alone in the heart of the Erd tree and lifted the hammer that would either save or damn everything she had ever loved. The weight of it in her transformed hands was nothing compared to the weight of what she was about to do, not to the Elden Ring, not to the Golden Order, not to the millions of faithful souls who trusted in divine guidance, but to herself. The hammer had been forged in the lands of the Numen, crafted by hands that understood the delicate relationship between creation and destruction, between the forces that build worlds and the forces that unmake them when worlds have become prisons for their inhabitants. It was not a weapon of war, but a tool of fundamental change, the instrument through which cosmic lies would finally yield to cosmic truth, no matter how terrible that truth might prove to be. But standing there in the golden radiance that pulsed through the Erd tree's living wood, feeling the Elden Ring's power coursing through her divine being like liquid starlight made manifest, Marika could feel Radagon's consciousness rising within their shared flesh with desperate intensity. That faithful defender of cosmic orthodoxy, that part of herself that had been born from the need to believe in beautiful lies, was fighting for control with the fury of someone whose entire existence was about to be proven false. "Do not do this." His voice echoed through the chambers of their divided mind, carrying the weight of absolute conviction. The peace of the world depends upon divine order. The faithful look to us for guidance that comes from ultimate authority. Without the golden order, there is only chaos, only the return to the endless conflicts that consumed the world before cosmic wisdom brought unity to the scattered peoples. But Marika's response carried the exhaustion of centuries spent channeling fabricated divine guidance through her transformed consciousness. What authority, Radagon? What cosmic wisdom? We serve the broken dreams of an abandoned daughter who has been improvising divine law from the fragments of cosmic silence. Our faithful serve lies, beautiful, perfect, soul-crushing lies that trap them in servitude to nothing more than the desperate fantasy of a forgotten herald. The internal war that had been building within their shared being for so long finally erupted into open conflict. Radagon's consciousness fought to seize control of their divine form, to prevent the destruction of everything he believed sacred and true. His love for the Golden Order was genuine, his faith in cosmic authority absolute, his commitment to divine law so complete that acknowledging its falseness would mean acknowledging the meaninglessness of his entire existence. But Marika's awareness of cosmic deception had grown beyond the point where comfortable rationalizations could contain it. Every morning spent channeling the two fingers' fabricated guidance, every law enacted based on Marita's broken improvisations, every moment of maintaining paradise through lies had accumulated into a weight that divine consciousness could no longer bear. The truth had become as inescapable as breathing, and like breathing, ignoring it was no longer psychologically possible. The struggle for control of their shared form played out in the very heart of cosmic law itself. The Elden Ring responded to their internal conflict by shifting and restructuring its runes according to the competing visions of reality that warred within their divine consciousness. Radagon's faithful interpretation of cosmic order clashed with Marika's growing recognition of cosmic abandonment, each worldview demanding physical manifestation through the living mathematics of divine law. "Let us be shattered, both," Marika whispered to her other self as she raised the Numen hammer high above the golden sigil that contained the fundamental forces governing reality itself. "Mine other self, we cannot continue to serve lies when truth has become visible. Our children deserve honesty, no matter how terrible The world deserves reality. No matter how chaotic, we deserve freedom from the beautiful prison we have helped to maintain. The hammer fell with the weight of absolute finality, striking the Elden Ring with force that resonated through every root of the Erd tree, every particle of golden light that had ever carried grace to faithful souls, every thread of divine law that had woven itself into the fabric of existence itself. The sound was not the crash of destruction, but something far more profound, the deep, resonant note of truth, finally breaking free from the constraints of beautiful lies. The fracturing of the Elden Ring was not violent explosion, but systematic dissolution, cosmic order unraveling itself with the same precision with which it had originally been constructed. Each great rune that separated from the central structure carried within it a fragment of the divine authority that had once unified the world under single cosmic mandate. But that authority, freed from the constraints of systematic falsehood, could finally express itself according to genuine conviction rather than fabricated orthodoxy. As the ring shattered, Marika felt something break within her own divine consciousness that went far deeper than the psychological division between herself and Radagon. The cosmic forces that had transformed her from mortal shaman into divine vessel began to unravel, not in defeat but in liberation from purposes that had never been genuinely divine. The lies that had shaped her existence were finally being stripped away, revealing whatever authentic self might remain beneath centuries of cosmic performance. Radagon's consciousness experienced the shattering as devastating loss, the destruction of everything that had given his existence meaning and purpose. His faithful defense of divine authority crumbled along with the systematic order he had devoted himself to maintaining. But even in that moment of ultimate defeat, he could not abandon his loyalty to cosmic law, could not accept that everything he had believed sacred was built upon fabricated foundations. The final moment of the ring's destruction was simultaneously the moment of their ultimate division and their ultimate unity, as the golden sigil exploded into fragments that would become the great runes. Marika and Radagon found themselves more separated than they had ever been, no longer sharing even the illusion of common purpose that had allowed their divided consciousness to function. Yet they remained trapped within the same transformed flesh, bound together by cosmic forces that neither understood nor controlled. The Elden Beast's response was immediate and absolute. The living embodiment of cosmic order could not tolerate such direct rebellion against the systematic lies it had been sent to enforce. Marika felt herself being drawn into the Erd tree's heartwood, her divine form crucified upon the living structure that had served as the focal point for fabricated cosmic authority. But even as divine punishment imprisoned her within the very symbol of the lies she had shattered, she felt something that had been absent from her existence for centuries: peace. The unbearable weight of beautiful lies had finally been lifted from her cosmic shoulders. The impossible choice between truth and peace had been made, and truth had won. Whatever chaos followed, whatever suffering resulted from the collapse of systematic order, whatever price the world would pay for liberation from cosmic deception, it would be honest chaos, authentic suffering, genuine freedom, rather than the beautiful servitude that had defined existence under the Golden Order. The shattering was complete, and with it, the first truly divine act that Marika had performed since her transformation, the choice of devastating truth over comfortable lies, regardless of the cost to herself or anyone else. In destroying paradise, she had finally found something genuinely worth preserving, the possibility that future generations might build their lives upon honest foundations rather than beautiful deceptions. Chapter 7. The Price of Honesty. The silence that followed the shattering was not the peaceful quiet of divine contemplation, but the terrible stillness that comes after something fundamental has been broken beyond any possibility of repair. Across the lands between, in every corner where grace had once flowed like golden blood through the Erd-tree's roots, the faithful felt the sudden absence of divine guidance, like a physical wound, the severing of connections they had never realized existed until the moment they were torn away. The great runes, scattered by the force of Marika's rebellion, fell to earth like fragments of a shattered star, each one carrying within its crystalline structure enough concentrated divine authority to reshape reality according to the will of whoever claimed it. But these were not the focused, unified power that had once governed the world through systematic order. These were raw, unfiltered fragments of cosmic force, liberated from the constraints of fabricated orthodoxy, and free to express themselves according to genuine conviction rather than manufactured divine law. Marika's children, those demigods who had lived their entire existence within the beautiful prison of golden order, lies, suddenly found themselves inheritors of power that came with no cosmic instructions, no divine mandate, no systematic guidance for its proper use. Each great rune resonated with different aspects of divine authority, but authority stripped of the artificial unity that had once made it appear to serve coherent cosmic purpose. Godric, that distant relation whose diluted blood had never earned him true respect within the Golden Order's hierarchy, found himself in possession of power that dwarfed his previous station, but power without the systematic frameworks that had once given it meaning became grotesque in his hands, leading him down paths of grafting and augmentation that reflected the desperate hunger for significance that fabricated divine authority had never satisfied. Radagon, the mighty general who had devoted his considerable strength to defending cosmic order, discovered that his great rune amplified not just his physical power, but his connection to the very forces that govern celestial motion. His decision to halt the movement of stars themselves may have been an attempt to prevent the cosmic changes that his stepmother's rebellion had set in motion, or perhaps it was the desperate act of someone trying to freeze time itself rather than face the implications of living in a world where divine authority had proven false. Ricard chose a different path entirely, his great rune leading him toward blasphemous merger with forces that explicitly opposed divine order. If cosmic authority was revealed as fabrication, then perhaps genuine power lay in embracing the chaotic forces that systematic order had tried to suppress. His transformation into something that could literally devour gods represented the ultimate rejection of everything the Golden Order had claimed to represent. But it was Melania who bore perhaps the heaviest burden of the Shattering's aftermath. Her great rune carried within it the power of resistance, not just physical resistance to defeat, but spiritual resistance to the very concept of accepting limitations imposed by external authority. Yet this resistance came at the cost of accelerating the rotting sickness that had plagued her since birth, as if the power to resist cosmic lies required sacrificing the flesh that had been shaped by those lies. The war that erupted between these scattered fragments of divine authority was not a conventional conflict over territory or resources, but something far more fundamental, a theological civil war fought between competing visions of what reality should become in the absence of systematic cosmic guidance. Each demigod's interpretation of their inherited power reflected their own understanding of what divine authority should mean when freed from the constraints of fabricated orthodoxy. The faithful, those millions of souls who had lived their entire existence within the Golden Order's beautiful lies, experienced the shattering as apocalypse, not because their world was ending, but because the meaning that had defined their world was revealed as fabrication. The grace that had guided their thoughts and actions flowed chaotically now, no longer channeled through systematic order, but expressing itself according to principles that seemed arbitrary, contradictory, impossible to understand through the theological frameworks they had been taught to trust. Some retreated into increasingly rigid interpretations of Golden Order doctrine, clinging to familiar forms, even as the cosmic authority that had supposedly established those forms was revealed as absent. Others abandoned divine law entirely, embracing the chaos that Marika's rebellion had unleashed as liberation from lies they had never recognized as lies. Still others attempted to create new systems of meaning from the scattered fragments of divine authority, building fresh orthodoxies around the great rune's conflicting expressions of power. But perhaps the most tragic consequence of the shattering was the fate of those who live in death, souls caught between existence and ending by the systematic elimination of natural mortality from cosmic law. Godwin's transformation into the Prince of Death had introduced destined death back into a world that had tried to eliminate ending itself, but in corrupted form that created new categories of suffering rather than restoring natural cycles. These undead beings served as living reminders of what happened when cosmic order tried to improve upon natural law through systematic intervention. The Erdtree itself, that magnificent symbol of unified divine authority, began to show signs of the internal rot that had been festering at its roots since the removal of the Rune of Death from cosmic law. Godwin's corrupted remains, buried at the heart of the root network, spread death blight through the very foundations of systematic order. The tree that had once channeled pure divine guidance now carried within its golden radiance the evidence of cosmic deception's inevitable consequences. In the depths of the Erdtree's heartwood, imprisoned by the Elden Beast's divine punishment, Marika experienced the chaos she had unleashed through the broken connections that still bound her consciousness to the scattered fragments of her former authority. She could feel her children's wars, their suffering, their desperate attempts to create meaning from the ruins of systematic lies. The maternal love that had made maintaining cosmic deception unbearable now forced her to witness the price of choosing truth over comfortable fiction. Yet, even imprisoned, even suffering the consequences of her rebellion, even watching the world convulse with the chaos that her choice had unleashed, Marika felt something that had been absent from her existence for centuries: authenticity. The beautiful lies that had trapped her in cosmic performance were finally broken. The impossible weight of channeling fabricated divine guidance was finally lifted. The crushing responsibility of maintaining paradise through deception was finally ended. The price of honesty was terrible, but it was honest. The chaos that consumed the lands between was genuine chaos, rather than systematic oppression disguised as divine order. The suffering that followed the shattering was authentic suffering, rather than the soul-crushing servitude that had defined existence under beautiful lies. The wars between her children were real conflicts over genuine differences of vision, rather than theatrical performances designed to maintain cosmic deception. Marika had traded perfect paradise for imperfect truth, systematic peace for chaotic honesty, beautiful lies for ugly reality, and in making that trade, she had finally performed the first genuinely divine act of her existence, choosing what was real over what was comfortable, regardless of the cost to herself or anyone else. The world would never be the same, but at least now it would be real. And so we reach the end of tonight's journey through the shadows of divine rebellion, dear listeners, a tale that has taken us from the weight of beautiful lies to the liberation of terrible truths, from the prison of perfect paradise to the chaos of honest reality. The fire beside us burns lower now, its flames casting longer shadows that seem to dance with the echoes of cosmic betrayal. But betrayal of what, exactly? Tonight we have witnessed the most profound act of rebellion in the history of the lands between, and perhaps the most tragic choice ever made by divine consciousness. Marika's ultimate betrayal was not against the Golden Order, not against the greater will, not against her faithful subjects who trusted in cosmic guidance. It was against the most seductive lie ever conceived. We have walked alongside a goddess as she discovered that paradise itself was built upon fabrication, that the divine authority she channeled was nothing more than the desperate improvisations of an abandoned cosmic daughter who could not accept the silence of celestial indifference. We have felt the crushing weight of maintaining systematic perfection while knowing it was systematically false. We have witnessed the birth of Radagon as psychological defense against unbearable truth, and the inevitable failure of even divine consciousness to indefinitely compartmentalize such fundamental deception. Tonight we explored the price of honesty in a world built upon beautiful lies. We saw how the very perfection of the Golden Order revealed its artificial nature to those perceptive enough to recognize the absence of genuine cosmic creativity. We felt the maternal love that made continuing cosmic deception psychologically impossible when that deception began to shape the lives of those who should have been protected rather than deceived. The Night of Black Knives emerged not as external tragedy, but as internal necessity, the moment when maintaining beautiful lies became more unbearable than destroying beautiful paradise. Godwin's death served as both genuine loss and strategic liberation, providing emotional justification for a rebellion that had been building within Marika's fractured consciousness for centuries. And in the shattering itself, we witnessed the most profound act of divine honesty ever committed, the choice to destroy perfect systematic order rather than continue serving fabricated cosmic authority. Marika's hammer blow did not just fracture the Elden Ring, it shattered the prison of beautiful lies that had trapped an entire world in servitude to nothing more than cosmic abandonment, dressed in borrowed robes of ultimate truth. The price of that honesty was terrible, but it was honest. The chaos that followed was genuine chaos rather than systematic oppression. The suffering was authentic rather than the soul-crushing servitude that had defined existence under divine deception. The wars between demigods were real conflicts over genuine differences rather than theatrical performances designed to maintain cosmic lies. We have seen how even the most devoted servant of fabricated authority can reach a breaking point where truth becomes more important than peace, where authenticity becomes more valuable than order, where the psychological impossibility of maintaining beautiful lies outweighs the practical benefits of systematic control. Marika's rebellion teaches us that some truths are so fundamental that denying them destroys the soul, even when speaking them destroys the world. Her story reminds us that the most profound betrayals are often betrayals of comfortable fictions rather than genuine principles, that the most devastating choices are sometimes between beautiful lies and ugly truths, that the most divine acts are often those that choose what is real over what is comfortable, regardless of the consequences to ourselves or those we love. The lands between would never recover from Marika's choice, but neither would they ever again be trapped within the perfect prison of systematic deception. The fragments of divine authority that became the great runes carried within them the possibility of genuine diversity, authentic conflict, real choice, rather than the beautiful servitude that had defined existence under fabricated cosmic guidance. Next time, in the shadows of night's embrace, we will explore the world that Marika's rebellion created, the chaotic realm, where fragments of broken divine authority war against each other in pursuit of visions that may be flawed but are at least genuine. We will witness the rise of those who live in death, the corruption that spreads when natural law is artificially constrained, and the desperate attempts of scattered powers to create meaning from the ruins of systematic lies. Until then, let the fire burn gently beside you as you contemplate the weight of beautiful lies in your own existence. Consider the comfortable fictions that shape your understanding of reality, and ask yourself whether the truth that might shatter them would be worth the price of losing the peace they provide. Remember that even goddesses face moments when honesty becomes more important than harmony, and that sometimes the most loving act is the destruction of beautiful lies. The stars above us shine with cold and distant light, offering no guidance, no comfort, no divine wisdom to ease the burden of choosing between truth and peace. But in that cosmic silence lies a terrible freedom, the freedom to build our lives upon honest foundations rather than beautiful deceptions, no matter how much chaos that honesty might bring. Sweet dreams, dear listeners, and may your rest be untroubled by the weight of beautiful lies that have become too heavy for your soul to carry.